Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk, where it's just going to be Chad and I talking today, but I guarantee you it's not going to be Chad and I talking for as long as Governor Burgum spoke during his State of the State address yesterday, which was over 2 hours of him talking. It was very indulgent. Doug likes to talk. And listen, I find Doug Burgum to be a fascinating person. I think he's always got a lot of interesting things to say. I thought that his State of the State speech yesterday was a little self-indulgent.
So, Rob, isn't it true that?
And by the way, my co-host Chad Oban joining the discussion.
I was gonna intro. I think you sort of did. You alluded to it was just going to be you and I. I think. But it wasn't that long ago where the State of the State was only during legislative years too. Was Burgum the one that started doing it annually?
I remember. I wrote about this. I think Schaefer might have done it once or twice. But yeah, I mean, typically, the Constitution obliges the governor to give a State of the State address. But I think it only requires, much like the State of the Union address that the president is required to give. But it's only required for legislative sessions. Doing this every year has been a Burgum innovation. And I was critical of it because I think one of the first ones he did, like the Chamber of Commerce bankrolled it, which I wasn't really keen on, that we're giving what is being characterized as an official address being sponsored by, as much as I don't have any problems at all with the Chamber of Commerce, but I don't think it should be sponsored by private interests. I don't think a labor union should sponsor it. I don't think anybody should sponsor it. It's an official speech of the governor of North Dakota. It shouldn't come with a corporate sponsorship.
Yeah, it sort of felt like in some of the people I've talked to about the length of the speech, a bit of Festivus feel. Like, I've got lots of things to say, and you people are going to listen to it. This might be my last chance to stand in front of you for the next two. And I also had somebody nationally who said, hey, I thought Burgum said he wasn't running for re-election. So is the State of the State just him talking about, but is it an honest question?
Yeah.
Is it him talking about what he wants the next guy to do? Because he won't be there next year.
Well, I think he's expecting the next person to be his lieutenant governor, which is one of the first things we're going to talk about here. That was very, Tammy Miller featured very prominently in the State of the State address. Who's
that, Rob?
The lieutenant governor, Tammy Miller.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Smart Alec. She figured, she gave a short introduction speech, to Governor Burgum. He was very effusive in her praise. Really for somebody who Miller hasn't been on that job for that long, was very effusive in his praise. A lot of times when he was showing pictures, like he was talking about supporting, stuff that they'd done to support law enforcement and the military. And then the picture was of Tammy Miller, greeting the military, which is not, I don't know. To me, it kind of seemed like he was promoting Miller. I think Governor Burgum still has a lot of the one thing you cannot say about Doug Burgum, because I think a lot of people like to dismiss him, that he viewed the governorship as a stepping stone to something else. I think that's unfair to him. I think that Burgum has a lot of ideas and a lot of plans for North Dakota that he's agree with him or not, that he's very passionate about. If you've ever sat in, if you've ever watched like a committee hearing or a policy meeting or something where he's not really, it's public, but he's not really in the spotlight. He's passionate about this stuff. Right. He really cares about his ideas. I think he's passionate about an agenda he has for North Dakota going forward. And I think he'd very much, and I don't want to be unfair to Tammy Miller, because I think, I don't want to insinuate that she's going to be some sort of a Burgum puppet, but I think there's a reason she joined the ticket. I think she greatly admires him, and I think Burgum has a lot of confidence that she would keep that trajectory going. And I think to me, that's all telegraphing the fact that, I mean, Miller's going to get into the governor's race. Yeah. And I think Burgum's going to back her because he sees that as a vehicle to accomplishing some of the policy aims he still has for the state.
So I would say one of the things that I've always noticed about Burgum is even when Brent Sanford was lieutenant governor, he was always very, it's the Burgum Sanford administration, the team. And he was all like, I don't remember any governor in the past being that sort of, even with both of his lieutenant governors.
So maybe my observation about him promoting Miller, I mean, you're right. That has been consistent.
But who knows? And I will say, I joked about who is the lieutenant governor. I mean, that's sort of an honest sort of assessment, I think, from the voters of North Dakota. It's a person who hasn't been lieutenant governor for that long. It's a person who's never been on the ballot before. But what I will tell you that I've heard about her is that she is very effective in terms of being task orientated, a good sort of contrast with the governor. The governor's sort of big picture, and she's more, I don't want to say, but she gets things done, right? I mean, she's sort of the CEO that's sort of hands-on, that gets things done. So I think it'll be an interesting campaign because I think she is different than Burgum. But one thing that I've heard, she's not like, I don't want to say warm isn't the right word, but she doesn't have like the big personality. When you think of a politician like walking into a room, that's not who she is, where she's going to really warm up to people and make, that side of glad-handing politician, which is just the opposite of Kelly Armstrong. I mean, Kelly Armstrong walks in a room and he knows everybody in that place.
I think, because there's always a lot of approaches. I mean, I don't think people should hear what you just said and necessarily view it as a criticism of her. It's her
Not
style.
At all.
And again, also, I would also argue that a lot of this, we're not basing this on a lot. We haven't seen Tammy Miller on the campaign trail. She's never been on the ballot. Not even as lieutenant governor. She was appointed to that position. So, I mean, when she runs for governor, and I believe she's going to, in fact, we may even see an announcement today, which is a point I want to get into. I have a column up about a big advantage that Kelly Armstrong has right off the bat. But when she gets in the race, I mean, this is going to be her first introduction to the public as a candidate. I mean, I don't know that a lot of North Dakotans don't know who she is. And she does have, she's CEO of Border States Electric. She by all accounts, did a great job there. Experienced person, successful person. And by the way, well worthy of consideration to be governor. I mean, no question about it.
And Rob, just to double down on what you said, I didn't mean any of that as sort of a negative towards her.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that many people that know her well, but the people who do talk about how good she is at what she does well. And I mean, again, CEO Border States, a national company, a big time company, big employer in North Dakota. She's been, seeing her run the Senate, she did that very competently, which when you see some of those senators get up there and try to run the Senate, maybe it's not as easy as it appears.
Right.
But, I think that she's done a competent job as lieutenant governor, and now people just need to get to know her and decide if that's who they want to be the governor.
She makes me think of John Hoeven in being very quietly competent, because John Hoeven also not a big political personality. Now he is good. I mean, when he gets in the room, he's good at shaking all the right hands, and he's good at calling out all the right people. And I think she'll be good at that too, but doesn't have that big sort of headline making personality that a Doug Burgum or even I would say a Kelly Armstrong or a Kevin Kramer does. She reminds me of Hoeven in that way, to the extent again that she's been characterized to me. I'm guessing here because we haven't seen her work in a political context very much.
Have you met her and had I think I've met her once and had like a 1-minute conversation with her.
I've interviewed her. We had her on the podcast. I don't think you were on for that one though.
I don't think so.
I've interviewed her, have exchanged some emails and texts. I think had a phone conversation at one point. She was, I really got, I wouldn't say get to know her, but I was first, sort of introduced to her and spoke to her for the first time in 2018. If you remember, she was considering a run for the United States that ultimately didn't run. And then ultimately Kevin Kramer got in that race. But she was considering at the time a run for the United States Senate then and opted not to. I spoke with her a little bit around that time. So not a lot though. A lot of what I'm basing my judgment on is sort of secondhand. So again, I mean, Tammy Miller in a lot of ways, kind of a question mark, and we're going to learn a lot about her, I hope.
Well, and I think that the big question, so if Burgum is all in, what does that look like? Does that mean he's spending, all of his, and she's wealthy as well.
Sure.
How much spending, not to mention Kelly's wealthy. I mean, it's not going to be a shortage of money here, but does Burgum put in his whole political apparatus? I mean, the fact that Dawson Scheffner was speaking on behalf of Tammy in that campaign, pretty good indication to me that the team might be lining up against Tammy. Yeah. But I got to tell you, what I saw on social media from state legislators and that kind of thing, there's a lot of people lining up behind Kelly Armstrong and are really excited about Kelly's race.
Well, I think the advantage, Kelly has a couple of advantages. One big one is he's already got a United States House campaign. That means he's got staff. That means, by the way, he's got. I haven't seen for his campaign. I haven't seen an end of year FEC filing. Those aren't done. Those aren't due till the end of this month. But he had nearly $500,000 in the campaign coffers. And one thing you got to realize, this is a race for the Republican nomination, right? So everybody's kind of, I think sometimes voters look at this and they're thinking, November. Really, it's June.
Right.
That's 122 days away. And really, the NDGOP convention is 72 days away. And, I mean, we could talk about that. There's a whole dynamic there with the NDGOP convention about who's going to go, who's not. Kelly's already indicated to me that they will go to June. But I mean, that's a short race. By the way, the local district conventions after this evening, we're recording this on Wednesday, the 24th. As of at the end of this day, there will have been 9 NDGOP local conventions held already.
Sure. Of
the 47. So this race is already happening. There's one gubernatorial candidate for Republicans that's in the race. That's Kelly Armstrong, officially announced. He's already got $500,000 and he's already got a campaign staff. And I'm not sure any of the other candidates can say that. Tammy Miller probably comes closest in that she has the financial backing probably to match to match Armstrong. And also, it sure seems like she's going to be able to sort of take, some of Burgum's campaign apparatus and use that for herself. But that's a big advantage for Kelly right away. The other thing is he's a known quantity. He was a state senator. He was a party chair. He's been the congressman since 2018. And he's got a voting track record. So to the extent that this race is going to be about, and I have a feeling this is going to turn into a slugfest. I mean, we've seen sort of the Burgum approach to politics, and he can get, I don't know what you want to call it, nasty, dirty. I mean, he's not afraid to sling some mud. This could turn into a slugfest, but I mean, to the extent that voters are going to look at this, Kelly's a known quantity. He's got a voting record. Tammy Miller's not.
And Kelly Armstrong is the most transparent politician that I recall. I mean, people know Kelly. He made the comment in his announcement that he's going to come back home to North Dakota where, things actually get done. I would make the case he never left North Dakota. I mean, he's back here all the time. His family obviously lives here. His kids go to school in Bismarck. He went to Washington. I don't know that he went Washington though, by any stretch of the imagination. I just think Kelly's got he's got the advantage of the fact that it wasn't that long ago where he ran a convention fight. So he has the apparatus in place where he's got people in districts that supported him in 2018 or whatever that year was against Campbell. And he's got resources. And I mean, again, he's well liked. And I do question a little bit about Burgum will have the resources. Burgum obviously will be aggressive. I feel like some of the shine came off Burgum in the last 2-3 weeks. And I don't want to sound like Tom Campbell here, like I talked to 100 people, but I think there is some frustration about maybe Burgum went a little bit national. We saw it some with his speech yesterday where it sounded like he was again running for president more than a state of the state for North Dakota. So I wonder if that's all advantageous for Tammy Miller and Kelly is who Kelly is.
One of the problems that lieutenant governors or vice presidents have is that they kind of get overshadowed by the people that they were serving with. A lot of times, they don't get to set the policy agenda, and Miller less so because she wasn't on the ticket that long. And I don't think that Burgum's policy agenda for North Dakota is all that controversial. In fact, I think largely it was pretty popular. But in terms of political tactics, if she's seen as kind of like she just steps in to the Burgum campaign machine. There's just things that Burgum's done that's really turned a lot of North Dakota voters off. We could talk about the gift cards thing, which I think it worked, but it had a lot of people kind of rolling their eyes. We could go back even a little further to his campaigns where his sort of entry or meddling in legislative races with the Flyers, where they just carpet bombed people with mailers. To the point where it's absurd. Where people were posting on Facebook where they had like a couple of dozen mailers getting stuffed in their inbox, or their mailboxes every week. Stuff like that. People remember. So I think Burgum's, had some campaign gimmicks that have worked for him, but I wonder what the shelf life are for those things.
Well, and I think the other question becomes is, where does Tammy go after Kelly? Is it from the right? Because people like, Brandon Pritchard and Nico Rios think that Kelly's a rhino.
Right.
So do you try to fill that?
How does Tammy Miller credibly, because that does seem to me the one sort of avenue where maybe, and again, I don't agree with this criticism, but if you're talking about the Republican base right now, the one avenue maybe where it gets something, we had Trump himself called for a primary challenge to Kelly when he voted against the first censure of Congressman Adam Schiff.
Rob, why do you say the first? Was there a second?
Because he voted for the second one, and his argument against the first one was not unreasonable, that it's unconstitutional for Congress to fine one of its members. And that seems very obvious to me, but we're also talking about a Republican electorate right now that thinks, that the 2020 election was stolen, or a significant chunk. So I don't know. That could be an avenue.
The other one is marriage equality, but is Tammy Miller going to go after Kelly Armstrong for voting in favor of marriage equality? I can't imagine.
I guess she could try, but is she really going to rally the cause of the sort of the mega faction, the populist faction of the North Dakota Republican Party? Is she going to marshal those forces and lead them credibly to an upset victory over Kelly Armstrong? That seems far-fetched to me. And also, I don't perceive, and again, this kind of gets into the question that Tammy Miller is a question mark, but I perceive her as a moderate.
Me too.
I perceive her as it would really surprise me if it did that. Now, it also really surprised me the extent to which Doug Burgum has embraced Donald Trump. And we also, like one thing that Tammy Miller did immediately, like within hours of Doug Burgum saying he wasn't going to run, Tammy Miller sends out a press release saying that she is endorsing Donald Trump.
And then yesterday, Kelly Armstrong made it perfectly clear after New Hampshire that the party should rally around Donald Trump. It was clear that Kelly wanted Trump to be a non-issue, that everybody's on the same side there.
We could do a whole show on the Republicans, who I think you and I both know in private would say, I assume that, and I'm not speaking out of school here. I would say, they could speak for themselves. I could say that in private, there's a lot of Republicans who understand what Trump is and do not want to endorse him. But the fact is, Trump controls their party right now.
Right.
And so it becomes an obligation to do that. We could do a whole show on that.
Yeah, but okay, so let's talk about that. Okay. If Kelly is seen as a rhino by some of these people, which, by the way, as somebody who's left of center, is a ridiculous comment to suggest Kelly is anything but conservative. Yeah. But we've seen in legislative races before that so who fills that lane? Because I don't think it's Tammy Miller, because I agree with you, she's probably a moderate. Is it Tom Campbell? Does Tom Campbell try to fill the lane of sort of the far right in this primary? Again, somebody else?
Again, I think somebody who could try. I think if you look back at his legislative track record, again, you'd say Tom Campbell's a pretty moderate guy. You also have the fact that he sold, had that land deal with Bill Gates. And by the way, I am not at all critical of that land deal. It's the Campbell family's land. They can do with it what they want. Willing seller, willing buyer. I don't have a problem with it. But he sold land to Bill Gates and continues to defend it. And there is a faction, that faction of the Republican Party that you would need to rally against the idea that Kelly Armstrong's a rhino. is going to look at that and say, you're not any better. So, I don't know. I mean, Julie Fedorchak's the other person that's she's talked about it. And again, not a person that I would see. I mean, she's a very reasonable, very astute, very qualified, I would say very wonky.
And conservative.
And conservative, but she's not crazy conservative. Not mega conservative. That's not my perception of her. And again, I don't know that she could credibly marshal or that she would want to. I just don't perceive her as being that sort of person. Now, I mean, again, she's well respected, well liked, has a track record of winning statewide elections, and ended her most recent election last cycle, which let's be honest, was not that competitive, with over $100,000 in her campaign coffers. So, I mean, she could run. I think every person we've named is worthy of scrutiny and worthy of consideration by Republican voters. These are not stupid people. These are capable, successful people. But I'm kind of doing the math here, and I don't.
But Rob, I just keep trying to figure. So let's say all those people end up running in the primary,
sure,
and all of them. I think Campbell's probably a little less out of the mainstream, but Armstrong, Miller, and Fedorchak certainly are in the mainstream. Unless, I mean, doesn't there have to be somebody who gets into this race who appeals to that Bastiat Becker sort of crowd? I mean, it seems to me Becker jumped into the wrong race here. It seemed like there's a place here for him, but is it one of those Bastiat type legislators that jumps into? I mean,
maybe.
I'm too young.
I'm also trying to think of who's the name that can bring. I mean, Becker kind of feels like, for the Bastiat crowd, like their strongest candidate.
Right.
And he put up less than 20% on the statewide ballot, albeit running as an independent, but put up less than 20% on the statewide ballot.
Let's play out the primary where there's 3 or 4 normies and one person who's not. 25% might be enough.
Oh, yeah, could be. If the math works out. I mean, if all of these people get in, and now you have Campbell, Miller, Fedorchak, and Armstrong all sort of pulling votes, all fighting over the largest piece of the pie, and then you have some purist ideologue, taking that what is it? And also, I mean, Becker got 20% in the statewide. That's going to be a larger percentage if you're talking about just Republicans.
Well, and we've now sort of established that the convention might not be a place that winnows down the field,
right?
The way like it's historically done. I mean, usually you have the party nominee and maybe one other person who goes to the primary.
Armstrong's already committed to going to June. I would think Miller would do the same. I mean, I don't think any of them are going to see the convention as binding, and why should they? I mean, which competitive primary has a candidate seen? Tom Campbell was the last one, 2018, right? He got beat by Armstrong in the House competition, and then opted. He was going to for a while, and then opted not to run in the June primary. But I have a feeling everybody this time around is going to take it to June, and in the June primary, I think that's where the Bastiats struggle. I think there's a reason Rick Becker didn't run to the June primary.
Unless the field is so stretched out.
Is so stretched out, you're right. So I don't know. That's an interesting dynamic.
I have to think that the sort of traditional Republicans would somehow sort of rally around a candidate or two. But you have many names.
Who's the name? I mean, first of all, who's the name? I mean, it's easy to put a question mark in there. Becker's running for the House. Now, I guess he could. I think you're wrong that Becker ran for the wrong race. Things kind of came up roses for him because right now he's the only announced Republican House candidate for an open race.
Sure. So, Rob, I just want you to think of for a second that you sort of said, I suppose he could change races. He has been known to change races mid-course or say, I mean, I'm old enough to remember when he said he wouldn't run for anything.
So is Tom. And then ultimately ran. I'm old enough to remember when he said he was going to abide by the NDGOP convention and then ended up getting into the general election. That was just last cycle. So, I mean, but if I'm him, right? I mean, if I'm him, I need a win. And if I'm him, I'm looking path of least resistance. And right now, path of least resistance is the House race.
And let's be clear, Rick Becker is more fit to be a member of the U.S. Congress than governor of any state. I mean, just sort of his style and all that kind of stuff.
Agreed.
I mean, he would fit into that the sort of far right caucus right now.
The Freedom Caucus.
I mean, yeah. What is he going to do? Go and try to throw out Mike Johnson when he gets there?
I mean, he'll go. I mean, I wouldn't say that he's like a Matt Gaetz. I mean, Gaetz is in a class by himself. But he's very much in that sort of obstinate. I would rather score ideological points than govern the country. I mean, he's very. There's no pragmatism there. I'm sure he probably thinks pragmatism's a dirty word, but again, right now, he's the only announced candidate for the United States House, and anybody who's likely to get into that House race is probably not somebody who's won on the statewide. I mean, Rick Berg could get in, but Rick Berg's from another political era. I mean, it's been a long time since he was on the ballot, and the last time he was on the ballot, I want to say that he got beaten badly, but he really didn't. He barely lost. But it felt like a bad beat because everybody expected him to win.
Republican losing statewide, it's a bad beat, man.
He is the last Republican to lose a statewide election. And it happened more than a decade ago now. So I mean that's some baggage that he brings with. So but Rick Berg could bring a lot of financial he would have the respect of a lot of people. He could raise a lot of money. He's got a lot of his own money. He would be formidable. But if I'm Rick Becker and my choice is between taking on Rick Berg or Kelly Armstrong,
right,
I'm probably choosing Rick Berg.
Right. So who else do you think gets in? I mean, in the article you talked about Berg, you talked about this gentleman from up in Minot, who again, it doesn't bode well for him. I know his last name is Black.
Kevin Black.
And he's on the board of higher ed. One of the people that wasn't in your article, this seems like a Brian Crocius thing to me. I mean, this seems like a place where he would run for Congress. He's between, like, he's not up for tax commissioner.
Right.
You can tell he wants a bigger office. He's very, I don't want to say politically astute. He's very safe when it comes to his politics. And is reasonable, and people seem to like it.
I would be very interested in considering Brian Crocius for Congress. I think Brian Crocius is an interesting guy. He's run in not very competitive races for a kind of under the radar offices, PSC and tax commissioner now. I would be very interested in Brian Crocius. Interestingly, he is a guy who normally gets back to me very, very quickly when I text things or ask him questions. He has not responded to my questions about this election, and maybe I should have put that in the column. But I mean, you also got to remember, I was carpet bombing so many people trying to find things. Kevin Cramer's not running for governor. That didn't make it in because he didn't get back to me right away. John Gottfried's not running for anything else other than insurance commissioner.
John's another guy that I would like to see make a run at one of these big offices.
He says he's not. He says he's not. He's not. His intent right now is not to run for anything but insurance commissioner.
So incredibly competent. Yeah. I think at some point he does it. But
I think you should stop. I think you should stop ruining these guys' chances by endorsing them as a liberal Democrat.
Listen, I'm not saying I'd vote for any of these people necessarily. Rob, you know what? What do I want? I want competence, and I think Crocius and Gottfried and Berg for that. But I got to tell you, I like Rick Berg because of one thing. He got elected to the legislature the same year my dad did. And every time I see him, he talks about my dad and how much he enjoyed him and whatever. Rick Becker's a nice guy. And I know my Democrat friends now are like,
Rick Berg, I think you
meant. Berg. I'm sorry, not Rick Becker. Rick Berg.
Rick Becker, by the way, is also a nice guy on a personal level.
I don't know Rick Becker well enough but Rick
I know
Berg
him well enough. Rick Becker, I still like Rick Becker on a personal level. I hate what his politics have become. Anyway.
Sure. Yeah, but Rick Berg has always been tremendously nice to me and my family, and I appreciate him. And again, my Democrat friends right now are like, "What are you talking about?" But,
yeah. Well, I mean, they had to. I mean, the hike. I mean, they drug him through the mud. I mean, and that's politics. I'm not. Yep. It is what it is. But I mean, they drug him through the mud. A lot of it was unfair. Rick Berg is one of those people where you meet him one-on-one. He is one of the nicest, warmest people. You look at the philanthropy he's done very quietly. But if you ran down the list, and I don't have it available between now, and a lot of it I think is not public, I've just sort of heard anecdotally, that guy has done a lot for North Dakota. He's done a lot for his community. He's very quietly in Republican circles. You start looking up state disclosure reports, Rick Berg's in just about all of them. He's a very generous, very nice man who, for whatever reason, when he gets on the campaign stump, sounds like he's trying to sell you a used car.
Right. So speaking of legislators and former legislators, usually when these offices come open, you have legislators jumping into these spaces.
Well,
when Betty Grandy, those kind of people have ran in the past. But what are you hearing any names?
Yes,
particularly in the House race.
I've talked to one for the House race that I can't. It was an off the record conversation. I don't want to burn. I think we'll be hearing that name in the future, but that'll be. But again, not a terribly well-known person outside of their legislative district. I think that's one of the problems lawmakers have. Also, the fact that there's kind of that thing where the legislature doesn't poll well, and so it's hard for a lawmaker, I think, to sort of divine out, especially a state lawmaker where the things they're voting on are not high profile. It's hard for them to sort of divine out their personal record from people who are frustrated with the legislature as a whole.
And it's easy for an opposition campaign to look at the 1,000 some odd votes that a legislator takes and pick out things and absolutely destroy them with it. Yeah. And so if the only track record if you've been in the legislature for too long, I think that's really difficult. If you've only been in for a session or two, I think you can handle that.
This is not somebody who's been there a long time.
So now, are you hearing anybody from sort of the Bastiat right who might be? Again, it feels like
I haven't heard anything, but those folks are also not exactly talking to me a lot these days.
Sure,
but I would hear. If there was a drumbeat for somebody, I feel like I would hear it. I'm not really hearing anything because again, I don't really know, as I'm thinking about their cast of lawmakers, I'm not really seeing somebody who could jump in where I'm like, yeah, that's real. Is it like Jeff Magrum? For all the success he has in Emmons County in District 8, I don't see.
You don't think that translates to Cass County?
Is it a Brandon Pritchard? Again, this guy is most well known for saying like wildly offensive things on social media. I don't see how people say, I'm looking at Congress and I'm seeing how dysfunctional and intractable it is, and I want to send somebody like that there.
But why do they set up that federal PAC unless their eyes were on this race? It seems to me you set up the federal PAC for this exact scenario that has just happened this week.
Yeah.
But they're
not going to run against Kramer.
No.
Kramer has another thing, and
not going to run against Becker.
And Becker's already in the House race, so they would be running somebody for governor. And maybe that federal PAC's about supporting Becker. And by the way, the federal PACs we're talking about, there have been several. Brandon Pritchard being one of them. They have set up several, sort of federal PACs, and I think the reason people like Chad and I are scratching our heads about it is a very arduous thing to create and maintain a federal committee. And when you screw up, the feds are on it. They pay attention. So, and the consequences for screwing around with that are serious. Less so with state. We can do a whole show on state campaign laws. I'm not somebody who ever wants to restrict, but our reporting requirements and the penalties for not meeting the reporting requirements are a joke. Last cycle, we had a statewide candidate Julie Fedorchak's opponent, and I'm forgetting her name now off the top of my head, Democratic MPL candidate, who didn't file a campaign disclosure. And and the thing was, I think I'm the only person who noticed. I had to alert the Secretary of State's office. So North Dakota's laws are very lax. So anyway, that's why we're saying these federal PACs are odd. I don't know why you would create a federal PAC unless you wanted to get involved in federal politics.
Yeah, and the other thing that I've been with this week, and that I'm very much opposed to the property tax measure that's going on.
Sure.
Rick Becker running for Congress, how does that affect that campaign? Does it bring some sort of, I've always thought that Becker might be doing this just to raise, to stay in the press, to run for one of these offices moving forward. Is he just using this this anti-property tax thing to just further himself? And does he get bored with the property tax thing, or does he continue to use it moving forward? I don't know the answer to that, but it seems like Rick Becker does very little that's for the good of anybody other than Rick Becker. And so I would be interested to see how this plays out. The
one thing I don't question about Rick Becker is he's a purist. I think he genuinely wants to get rid of the property tax. I think he genuinely wants to do that. I think it would be, I would say, I'm going to be somewhat less, I think, cynical in my, and cynical is unfair to you, but less.
I'm cynical on this.
I'm going to be more generous, I think, to Becker and say that he might be just making a mistake. I don't think it's a calculated thing. I think he's going to take his eye off the ball of the property tax measure, and I think that's going to hurt because I'm looking at, again, in that sort of oeuvre of people who are, are fellow travelers with him are going to take that on. There's not a lot of people who are competent to jump into that. You have somebody like Jared Hendricks. I mean, his time's already on this age limit thing for Congress that he's already being paid to do that. Is he going to do property taxes as well? And by the way, it seems like the property tax measure is being circulated by a lot of the people who are behind the erroneously and risibly named Election Integrity Act ballot measure. It seems like a lot of them are circulating it at the same time. Yep. I don't have a lot of confidence that those people have their ducks in a row.
Yeah, I mean, it's people like Charles Tuttle are carrying both signature petitions at the same time.
So I don't know. I mean, he has said that they're a little over halfway. But also
the first half is always easier than the second half.
They knocked off a lot of low-hanging fruit. If they want to get that issue on the ballot, they're going to have to hustle. And if Becker's worried about running for House, and also, I mean, when I've reached out to him for comment, like he's still got a day job. He's still doing surgeries. He's still a plastic surgeon. So, I mean, this stuff takes a lot of time. And I do think your point is well made. His eye could be off the ball of the property tax measure. So you think Miller gets in this week? Campbell is in or is not in, or is he still waiting on that website to get Campbell? He told me, he says, you can report that I'm running for governor, but I haven't officially announced. And he said he hasn't officially announced because his campaign website isn't ready. And listen, it's not my place to give these people advice, but your campaign website's not that important. Like, do you have a Facebook account? Do you have a Twitter account? Like, that's enough for now. No. Like, eventually, get the campaign website set up. But again, Armstrong's in the race now. Armstrong's in the race, making all sorts of headlines. He's got a bunch of money already. He's got a campaign staff already. You're waiting on your campaign website. Like that.
Well, and you and I both know Kelly well enough that he's on the campaign trail today.
Right. And should be, because again, by the end of the day that we're recording this, there's going to be 9 districts that have already, held their conventions, selected their delegates for the state convention. So, 9 out of 47. I mean, the race is happening now already. Right. It's a short timeline. The convention is 72 days away.
Yeah. And again, I just think about Kelly walking into a convention versus the other candidates we're talking. Fedorchak has some familiarity with that.
Sure.
I mean, Tammy Miller, this is going to be your first time going out to conventions. That's a interesting person.
And Burgum's political people. I mean, I'm trying to think. Like in 2016, when he first ran, that was probably the most they engaged at a convention, and they mostly skipped it. They didn't. I mean, he was on the ballot, he was voted on, he took 3rd place, but also Burgum had made it clear, I'm here only sort of nominally. I'm going to the June primary.
Which isn't the best pitch to people who spent their weekend going to Bismarck.
Right. Like you're telling all these people who showed up and spent a bunch of money, which, by the way, we should talk about that in a moment. But they showed up, they spent a bunch of money to travel to, I think that one was in Fargo too. That was in Fargo, 2016. Yeah, because like Ted Cruz was there. Yeah, I remember that.
I was at the Dems in 2016.
Yeah.
Maybe I went to that one too. I used to go to both.
I'm a little upset that the Democrats and the Republicans are holding them simultaneously, because I can't be in both places, and I want to be in both places, but I'm going to end up, I think, kind of watching the dynamics play out here. It seems like all the action's going to be at the Republican convention.
Who knows if Mary Adams? Who knows if Mary Adams can even get you into the Dem convention?
Adam Goldwyn, the chair of the party, told me that I'm already in for credentials But I mean, I was actually more worried about the Republicans giving me credentials this year.
That's actually really interesting.
I got credentials for both, so I shouldn't have problem getting into both. I don't know how it is. Like, I'm like, do other members of the media have this trouble getting credentials? Like, I don't.
Other members of the media don't say stuff about people the way you do, commentator.
Yeah, well,
Well, you think McFeely's getting a credential to the Republican convention?
He did in 2016. I sat next to him.
He?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, good for them.
Yeah, I don't know that anybody's had as much trouble getting credentials sometimes as I do. I'm nobody covers this stuff the way I do either, so I don't know.
But Rob, because of it, you made a lifetime friend with former Representative Mary Adams. We'll always have your back.
We are good buddies, and I should mention that Josh, at the time, the House Minority Leader, Josh Boucher, came up to me at the convention. He said Mary had beat him to the punch. He was gonna. Which I thought was kind of interesting. Like, their party said no, but then they were like just gonna sneak me in.
Yeah,
I was kind of, anyway. That's a whole thing. Where were we?
Speaking of conventions, Republicans are going to charge a bunch of money to go to theirs.
Yeah, they jacked up the price. They're up to, well, here, I should pull up the column so I quote these numbers correctly. But we started talking about this, about, Tammy Miller's never really gone through the convention. I would argue that, I mean, if she's going to use Burgum's campaign people, they never really have either. 2016, they didn't really campaign at the convention, and and he hasn't really had a challenger since, not in 2020. So, but maybe it doesn't matter. I mean, maybe it's all going to be about June anyway.
Even their campaigns historically have just been sort of bombarding the media, right? Sort of like what you said with the legislative races, with the mail programs. I mean, they've always outspent their opponents like 10-1, 20-1, 100-1.
I think they're going to have a tough time doing that with Armstrong because, again, Armstrong's got plenty of his own money. Also, Armstrong has ties to the oil industry that, they don't. I think, I mean, if you're looking at like some of the big players in the oil, like a Harold Hamm or something, who is an actual billionaire. Everybody calls Doug Burgum a billionaire. He says he's not. Harold Hamm is a legitimate billionaire.
So actually, one of the names that I've heard or seen somewhere is Brent Sanford coming back. And I know Brent Sanford is sort of connected in that Harold Hamm sort of world.
Yeah,
do you think there's any way Sanford jumps into one of these?
I don't know. I don't know. That would be interesting. I don't know what his ambitions are. I haven't spoken to him. I know his name was mentioned in a North Dakota Monitor story, and I think he was mentioned by Bob Harms. I don't know. I should text him and find out.
I think that would be interesting. He obviously left the lieutenant governor spot to go into the private sector, but I don't think he completely closed the door on future public service or runs for office. Obviously, that would make things awkward for the current chairman of the GOP if her husband was running for one of these offices. But I think he would make an interesting candidate, too, from out west.
I would be as critical as I have been of Sandy Sanford, who's his wife and the chair of the party. I really like Brent Sanford. I would like to see him run for an office again. I would be very interested in his candidacy if he announced.
Yeah, and I think, again, he's one of those guys who's well-liked. To know him is to like him, right? I've never heard somebody who's like, I know Brent Sanford. What a jerk. I mean, everybody pretty much likes him.
I think he's a serious guy. I think he's a good policymaker. He's a conservative. I don't, for Republicans, they like that sort of thing. Okay, so the Indy GOP convention, I thought this was really interesting. A couple of things about it. I mean, first of all, jacking up prices, and I think that has everything to do with the fact that the party's fundraising has not been going well under Sandy Sanford. They jacked up the price for presidential candidates to participate in the Indy GOP caucus. They got $20,000 from a bunch of candidates who aren't going to be there. I mean, at this point, because I think they got money from Vivek Ramaswamy, they got money from Burgum. I think they got money from DeSantis. And maybe one or two others. I think Tim Scott even paid. None of them are going to be there. Haley might be there. I mean, she hasn't dropped out yet, but New Hampshire didn't go well for her. So I don't know. But at this point, they got a bunch of money for people who aren't even going to be participating in that, so that helped shore up their finances. And then they double, or I shouldn't say double, 76% increase in what it's going to cost for a delegate to attend the state convention in Fargo. That's up from the $85 fee in 2022. You also have to be a member of the NDGOP, so that's a $50 to pay to be a member. And then, once you get there, if you want to go to the prayer breakfast, that's $35. If you want to go to the governor's dinner, that's $125. A lot of districts also charge, not all of them, but a lot of them charge their own dues. So it's getting to be and then you think about it, it's in Fargo. So for most of the state, that's a drive. I mean, if you're in Williston or Minot or something, that's a long drive. That's fuel, that's hotel, that's meals. It's a lot of money, and there's a lot of grumbling about it. The other thing is there was a big controversy. You remember, you were at the 2022 convention with me. You remember how long it was taking them to like print out paper ballots, because they were doing all the stuff from the floor, where rule changes and all this maneuvering and a lot of
credentialing issues and all kinds of stuff.
And so when they vote on these things, they have to like print out the ballots and then distribute them. They've always done paper ballots. And so this time around, they wanted to have a vendor come in and do electronic votes. And my understanding of this vendor, they do it at like I think they provide these services at like stockholder meetings and stuff, like a lot of venues like that where the votes are serious and they matter, and there's a need for security and things like that. And there's
legal rules around those kind of things, right? There's actual laws.
Right. Those are big things. So this vendor, and by the way, the NDGOP's bylaws would allow for electronic voting as long as it's approved. So they had it all in place. And then, kind of the populist wing of the party that's very invested in the idea of election fraud or stolen elections or whatever, they came out and said, we can only have paper ballots. So that's ultimately what the party voted for. So we're going to have all these super competitive races, and we're all going to be sitting for a long time waiting for them to print out ballots again, which is how they've always done it in the past. But it just seemed like a crazy thing, like just against any sort of progress at all on anything.
It is 2024 after all, and we're still running elections for these private organizations like it's 1980. I will tell you, the National Education Association, of which I go to their annual convention, went to digital voting a few years ago. Like everybody got like a little hand thing and you had to register it and whatever. And there are some technical glitches, but that was 10,000 people.
Right.
And they were able to figure out how to make it work.
NDGOP, conceivably could be a couple thousand. It was a couple thousand in 2022. I was thinking it was going to be down this year, but if we're going to have hot races for governor, hot races for House, and who knows what other
couple candidates for DPI already.
Right.
But going back to
by the way, one of them, Mr. Bartlett, who's been making the rounds, he's going to be on the podcast next week. He's challenging Kirsten Baszler.
Well, thanks for I'm glad the audience and your co-host found out at the same time. What a time to be alive.
Yeah, well, you're not on that show, so you're off.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. But thinking about paying the delegate fees and all those things, is that just going to lead to more candidates having to pay for their delegate fees for like that's not illegal or like against the bylaws or anything that candidates pay for.
It's been controversial in the past. I remember it was controversial, Kevin, when it was Berg v. Kramer for the House in 2010. That was controversial. I remember 2018 Armstrong versus Campbell. Campbell paid for a bunch. And I think Armstrong paid for some too, but I think it was mostly his family, if I'm remembering that right.
But if you're going to cost people out,
the more you put it up, the more temptation there's going to be, because these candidates are, even though the convention vote's not binding, nobody wants to go to the June primary saying I was rejected by the NDGOP convention. Even though you could still win. Burgum took third and he won in a landslide. So, it's not a death blow, but they're going to compete for it. And yeah, there's going to be pressure, I think, to want to pay for it.
It's interesting to think that the GOP has sort of become, with Trump and others, sort of the party of the working man. And then you're basically saying, costing people out of participating in this.
It's not unfathomable that, for somebody who's from Dickinson or Williston or something, that weekend might cost them, for one person, upwards of $1,000.
Right.
By the time you spend, $300-$400 on 2 nights of hotel rooms,
Not to mention potentially taking work off on a Friday.
There's on a Friday to travel there. Usually the big stuff happens on Saturday, but they get started right in the way in the morning on Saturdays. So if you're from Crosby, you're gonna have to drive, or from Minot. I'm not gonna be driving down. I don't have to pay the dues or anything, obviously.
Rob, what I saw you mentioned Crosby, what I saw from the delegates from District 2 in 2022, those folks are going to show up at the convention no matter what.
They're going to be there.
They're going to be there.
They're going to be there in force. So anyway, just so many interesting things happening, and I don't think we can take any of this for granted. Miller versus Armstrong, we've talked about some of the advantages that Armstrong has. Miller can overcome those. There's no question. Campbell could overcome those. Fedorchak could overcome those. there's no joke candidates here. You and I can, I guess, do the horse race to kind of look at one. And I kind of feel like Kelly's got the advantage right now, but that could change.
Yep.
So that's interesting.
And I think we've sort of, we haven't talked much about Julie Fedorchak, but you're absolutely right. She's exceptionally competent. Before she was a PSC commissioner, she worked in the governor's office.
She has ties.
She's a policy wonk.
She has ties to. She worked in the Hoven administration and the Dalrymple administration. She was appointed by Dalrymple. Those folks have networks. Those folks have money. I don't think Fedorchak is individually wealthy like a Kelly Armstrong or a Tammy Miller or Doug Burgum, but she has people who can certainly fundraise her campaign. She's not. If she decides to get in, and she's not in, she told me she's mulling it. But if she decides to get in, she's someone to take seriously. I also
think she would be an interesting congressional candidate with the current lineup of candidates as well.
Yeah.
I think she's formidable.
I think so. So she's somebody to keep an eye on. It's going to be interesting to see who gets in that House race. It really is, because again, right now Becker's the only one on the Republican side running, of course.
Trigby
Hammer and Katrina Christensen. I will say overall, my perception is, this is one thing where the Republicans just beat the heck out of Democrats, is there's going to be so much. I can tell you which, and it's unfortunate because I want to cover the Democratic convention as well, but there's going to be so much attention on the Republican because that's going to be where the action is. And
unless everybody decides not to go to the convention. Right. If everybody just says,
I guess that's possible.
I'm not going to get the nomination or I don't want to be associated with craziness that's going to take place. I think there's some real concern if I'm one of these down ballot statewide Republicans about sharing the stage with people. There is going to be crazy stuff said at that convention.
There's going to be crazy stuff stuffed in the resolutions. But again, we're talking about everybody's having to bend the knee to Donald Trump right now.
And that's the other thing that's going to happen in this governor's race. I think you're going to have people. I told somebody this morning that I think there's some good candidates running for governor on the Republican side who are going to be good governors once they get in. But I'm going to be very frustrated on what it's going to take in terms of, kissing the former president's backside or saying nice things to get there. And I understand the politics of it, but there's going to be some deep swallowing.
Yeah. I think a lot of them are going to see endorsing Donald Trump as they're going to do it because they don't want to invite trouble, right? There's always the chance that if you don't bend the knee, the Trump machine notices, and they create all sorts of problems for you. I would notice Kelly Armstrong had not officially endorsed Trump until basically he announced he was running for governor.
Well, and isn't there a scenario where, Trump is called on Armstrong to be primaried? Burgum is clearly all in on Trump. Does Trump come into this primary for Tammy Miller at some point?
He could. But how much will it matter? It might matter. I don't know. It could. I thought, he got involved in the treasurer's race 4 years ago and Tom Beadle ended up winning. I don't know. That's an interesting dynamic, though, because that could be, Burgum's obviously made some friends in Trump world. And that may be one of the things he can call on is for Trump to reach down and endorse Tammy Miller. And again, he's already called for a primary challenge for Kelly Armstrong in the past.
And what is
unfairly?
What does Kramer do?
I think
in the
Kramer
governor's
probably
race.
keeps his powder dry. Kramer's very astute, and is not. I think if he does anything, it'll be late. It'll be something like what he did for Hoeven, where
He was very effective for Hoeven. Very effective.
but you didn't hear a lot from him until the day of the convention, and he was very effective at the convention, standing up for Hoeven.
Right.
And you could say possibly was the deciding factor. So if you see Kramer do something, I think it's going to be very subtle. He's not going to be. I don't think he's going to be in anybody's television ad. That would surprise me, but I think if he chooses a candidate, but again, who would he choose? Between Miller and I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, because I don't see him close to the Burgum world. I don't know how close he is to Kelly. I mean, I assume the three of them, Hoeven, Kramer, and Armstrong, work well together in Washington, but I don't know if that means they're sort of from different generations, Kelly and Kramer. So, yeah, it'll be.
That was when I asked Kevin Kramer if he was interested in running for governor. He said that the Senate is better for old guys. I think that was his quote. Which is kind of funny. I hadn't really thought about Kevin Kramer as being all that old, but I guess he is. Actually, though, 3 years younger than Doug Burgum. So, a lot of people don't know that. Doug Burgum actually is our third oldest person ever to be elected governor. Doug Burgum is older than Jack Dalrymple. Which you wouldn't say, and I don't mean this to. But
currently, Burgum is older than Jack Dalrymple, when they got elected.
Well, he's always been older than Jack. His age hasn't. They're both aging.
You're looking at currently, not when they got elected, and comparing that.
No, when they got elected, Doug Burgum was older when he was elected than when Jack Dalrymple first took the governorship when Hoeven left because he was lieutenant governor. But yeah, Burgum was older than Dalrymple when they each became governor.
I thought you were suggesting that as of today, Burgum is older than Dalrymple.
He is older. No, he is older than Dalrymple today.
How old is Burgum?
Well, okay. Now we're gonna have to look it up.
And how old is Jack?
Okay, hold on. Give me a second.
Here,
you fill the dead air while I'm looking up on.
Well,
Wikipedia
I mean, the thing about Governor Dalrymple, he does have sort of a
Burgum 67.
Okay. Right. Dalrymple sort of got an old guy vibe to him. He sort of walks slow and
talks slow, talks quiet. Yeah. He's a quiet guy. Why is it?
This is riveting radio right now.
Yeah, 1948. He was born. Oh, never mind. He's 75. Why did I think he was?
Yeah, right. I'm so sick of coming on this podcast and fact checking.
Okay, I'm an idiot. I thought he was older, so I got fact checked. I was wrong. Maybe it was Hoeven. I remember I wrote something about this, but I don't. I messed up the names. Okay, well, we're clearly.
I will say this about Doug Burgum: he is older than I would guess he is.
Oh yeah, he's very vigorous. I mean, he's
high energy,
67 years old. I hope that I am as vigorous as he is. I'm not going to be, because
I hope I'm as vigorous as Doug Burgum when I turn 49, which is next year.
Right? Yeah, exactly. I'm not as vigorous as Doug Burgum is now. Like he's 67 and he's out playing pickup basketball before a presidential debate that he's going to be on stage for. Meanwhile, I'm spending my Saturdays, I spend my weekends like reading a book and playing video games.
With that said, when's the last time you tore your Achilles playing pickup basketball?
Not once. Sports are bad for your health. That's we're going to close out there. That's a terrible thing. All right. Be a political reporter. I always thought when I play pickleball with my friends, like they're getting strains and everything, and like I'm not. I always thought it was because you can't pull fat. Have you guys tried being fatter and not so muscular? Because that seems to be working for me. All right,
let's end it there.
This podcast has gone off the rails. We're gonna end it there. Coming up tomorrow, Congressman Armstrong's gonna be on. He has to come on the podcast, so it's gonna be a little bit out of our normal schedule, but he requested. I should say I reached out to Tammy Miller to see if she wanted to come on today or in the future. We haven't lined that up, but I'm working on it. Campbell, we've obviously had on. Well, I'm sure we'll have him on again as the race goes on. I want to get everybody on and talk to them all.
You reached out to Rick Becker as well to come on.
I did reach out to Rick Becker. He did not want to come on today, but we'll see about getting him on in the future as well. But yeah, Kelly Armstrong on Thursday. Kevin Kramer is going to be on Friday, and the next week we're going to have Mr. Bartlett. And I'm forgetting his first name now, but he's running for superintendent. He's going to be on the show Wednesday with Ben Hansen and I. And I haven't booked Friday yet because that's too far out. We'll see what happens there. But thank you for listening, and we'll talk again. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.